Hello, everyone, and welcome. We are delighted to be having you here joining us today for this incredibly critical topic on intentional integrity. My name is Nicola Corzine, and for those of you who don't know, you are joining us today with the Nasdaq Entrepreneurial Center. We are a nonprofit dedicated to enabling entrepreneurs from all over the globe to realize their maximum potential and grow. Now, we're going to be opening up for live Q&A at the end of the event. So please submit your questions into the Q&A function, which you'll find at the bottom of the screen. And before we get started, just a moment of thanks and recognition. Being a nonprofit in this space, supporting entrepreneurs with free education, none of this would be possible without the amazing, generous contributions of our remarkable sponsors, donors, and foundations who believe in the criticality of supporting entrepreneurs worldwide. To them, we say thank you. We owe you everything. Our entrepreneurs are truly grateful, and we're so delighted and humbled to be working beside each of you. Now, during these unique times, we are actually curious on a couple of things that we are doing live polls from. We've been doing this pretty much since the beginning of the pandemic and have been sharing out the responses and tracking and trending how our entrepreneurs are faring in this time. So I'm going to be launching a poll right now that basically asks you to share as much as you can how you are feeling in this very challenging time. When we started the pandemic, understandably, there was quite a heightened level of anxiety, as well as a healthy dose of optimism, as you would expect with tremendous entrepreneurs. We've been seeing a positive trend line continue towards an optimistic view, and still a healthy amount of entrepreneurs who are struggling for their own survivability in this time. So one of the reasons that we're launching and sharing this poll is A, to let you know that you're not alone, and B, to also kind of understand what are those issues that are so critical to our entrepreneurs. So I'm going to share that with you. Great to see a healthy dose of optimism again on our call today, with over 60% of our attendees feeling very, very optimistic. Now, the second poll that I'd like to just quickly get a heat map for the benefit of our amazing host and panel today, is what kind of entrepreneur you are. So are you one that is already in business? Are you aspiring? Do you have a side hustle that's soon about to launch? Or are you in the support system, an investor, an amazing service provider, a mentor, a coach to entrepreneurs? If you could just take a moment to help us get grounded on who we have joining us now, close to 100 people already launched with us today. And that will help us make sure that the questions that we're answering today are really spot on for the attendees that we have with us. So I'm going to go ahead and end that poll and let you see with us today a very nice grouping of both entrepreneurs and aspiring entrepreneurs. So great to see Jeff and Rob, the grouping that we have now. And the last poll that I want to ask is kind of one that really helps us define our programs at the center. We are an organization that builds programs based on our entrepreneurs' needs. The way that we do that is we poll all the time to understand what is keeping you up at night right now. Not that we hope any of you are having sleepless nights, but if there is an issue area that you are tackling that is keeping you concerned and struggling, if you take just a moment to maybe identify the one that is most critical, you will hopefully see that reflected in our programming over the coming month, that we will prioritize and ensure that you have access to great leaders like Rob joining us today and Jeff joining us today to answer and address some of these questions. So again, you have greater access and greater opportunity to knowing how to navigate in challenging waters what it is that you need to build the companies that you're inspired to do. So let me just quickly share those results with you. We've got finance and sales definitely coming in at the top, and we've been seeing that definitely continue over the last handful of weeks. So we'll be sure to be continuing to put forward classes that address finance and sales, as well as scaling and pivoting in these times. All right. Well, thank you guys so much for indulging us, for sharing your wisdom, your insights. Those help us get smarter in our world, and we really appreciate all of your time and attention to that. So without any further delay, please join me in giving an incredibly warm welcome to our special guest today. We have Robert Chesnut, author of Intentional Integrity, former general counsel and chief ethics officer at a few companies you probably know, Airbnb, eBay, and Chegg, and your host joining us today, Jeff Thomas, who's the Senior Vice President of NASDAQ Corporate Services, and the Chairman of our board at the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center. Rob and Jeff, thank you so much for your time, and we're looking forward to this great conversation. Over to you.
Thanks, Nicola, and thank you, Rob, for joining us here today. I can't think of a more impactful topic to be talking about in everything that's going on in the world today than integrity. You've had an amazing career, as Nicola highlighted, where you've dealt with some of the most interesting issues facing tech companies over the last 20 years, and really excited to learn from you today. But welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Well, let's kick off, Rob. Let's start out just at a high level. When you talk about in your book intentional integrity, how do you define that, and why do you think it's important in today's climate?
Well, I'll start with the traditional definition of just plain integrity. And people will often say that it's doing the right thing even when no one's watching. The problem, Jeff, is that today everybody's watching everything. It seems like there's a cell phone camera, there's a chat room, a blog post. And so, more than ever, integrity has become important because the world's always watching. And brands, careers are on the line, I think, constantly with all the decisions that you make. The problem with integrity is, we know how important it is, but nobody really talks about what it means. It's a pretty poster on a wall, right? It's got the lake, it's got the trees, the sunset in the background. But companies, when it comes to actually doing something to drive integrity into the culture, they do things like, send out a canned code of ethics that they probably stole from another company online. Intentional integrity is about recognizing that integrity is really important to driving your business and protecting your brand, and engaging in a direct, authentic human conversation inside of your company to let everyone know that it's important, and sort of openly talk about what it means to do the right thing.
And what's at stake? I mean, if you don't take this step, if you do just put up the ethics policy that you copy and pasted from the internet, what are companies trying to protect against on the downside, and what's the upside to taking this issue head on?
Well, integrity is a powerful double-edged sword. If you don't get it right, and by the way, we've seen a number of companies fail here, everything from Uber and WeWork and the like, Theranos, it can wreck your brand. And we've seen entrepreneurs, founders lose their position, be driven out of their company for bad behavior. We've seen tens of billions of dollars just disappear overnight, it seems, when bad behavior inside of a company is exposed. So, literally, it's all on the line if you don't get it right. The good news is that it's not just all a downer here. Data is showing that companies that operate with integrity, that have got a greater purpose, actually outperform the market. They outperform their competitors. So if you get this stuff right, it's really a strong wind at your back and can drive your business. So, with all that in mind, it really makes sense for companies of all sizes to really think about it and make it a part of their strategy, because it can make all the difference.
So as you saw in the poll, the vast majority of the audience here is either early stage entrepreneurs or aspiring early stage entrepreneurs. What advice do you have for founders who are just getting started? How do you get this set up right from the start?
I think a mistake a lot of people make, Jeff, is, well, I'm a small company now. I don't need to worry about that sort of stuff. I'll deal with it later. There is no better time to be thinking about these things than right from the beginning, in the proverbial garage. Why? Well, integrity starts with understanding what is your purpose as a company. Why do you exist? And profit is not purpose. So all companies need to understand what's their North Star. What are they doing that's good for the world? And that's something to be thinking about right from the very beginning. And setting the tone is so much easier. You hear so much about the first 10 people you hire are the ones that are going to make a huge difference in whether your company is successful or not. Well, if you focus on integrity early on, set the tone with those first 10, that in turn is going to follow through to the 10 people that each of them hire. It's hard to turn a big ship around. If a big company, by the time you get to be big, it's hard to fundamentally change your culture. the time to do it and focus on this is right early from the beginning, so that the tone is built throughout, so that you don't have to make any big changes later on down the line. It's naturally happening. And I'll also say that when a company is small, having a greater purpose really inspires people. It attracts talent. It gets people excited about wanting to work with your company. And it also, I think, inspires your customers. Because I think people want to work with companies that have values aligned with their own personal values. So what you might find is it's the difference that can get you in the door and get you started, because you are inspiring people that surround you. And that can be a strong boost early on in a company.
Well, and as you scale, and especially once you become a public company, what you'll find is investors now are also very focused on, do companies have integrity? Are they serving all their stakeholders and not just the shareholders? And there's a whole new wave of ESG investing, environmental, social, and governance focused investors, where if you don't have this right, you could miss out on huge pools of capital for growth of your business.
Right. I think a lot of investors want to feel like they're doing good with their money. Making money is terrific, but you also want to feel like you're having a positive impact in the world. And so if you can have your company aligned and operating in a manner that's consistent with what these investors are looking for, that opens up a lot of opportunities. And by the way, I think the reason a lot of investors are looking in this area is, Jeff, there's a lot of data out there right now that shows that companies with that purpose are outperforming the market and they're outperforming competitors. It's actually a smarter investment. So thinking about this stuff early on is just good, smart business.
Well, in terms of smart business, we're all dealing with all kinds of new challenges this year with the coronavirus pandemic. I know that's something that you address specifically in the book, and curious to hear your thoughts about how the challenges that we face this year have kind of exposed the need for this even more.
Yeah, my mom used to tell me that tough times reveal character, and I think that's true with companies as well as individuals. When there's fear, when there's uncertainty, that's when acts of leadership really can resonate and build trust with stakeholders. So I think the world is watching even more closely. And when you can do something that's good for a stakeholder, that demonstrates empathy or understanding for what they may be going through, that is appreciated and will have benefits for not just the time of the pandemic, but long thereafter. People have long memories about what you can do to help them during times like this. So I tell leaders, first of all, you got to communicate. People want to hear from you as a leader in times like this, because we're all alone. We're all at home by ourselves, and we need that connection. We need to be inspired. So I think leaders need to step up and communicate more than ever. And I think they need to use their resources to see what they can do to help other stakeholders, because that's the time to build trust.
Rob, one of the big things we focus on at the Entrepreneurial Center is mentorship. And I'm curious, throughout your career, who have been some of your mentors, and how do you think about the concept of mentorship as it relates to integrity?
The concept of mentorship for me is kind of interesting. I think that we're all mentors to each other. In other words, I do talk to a lot of younger entrepreneurs, but when I talk to them, it's a two-way street. In other words, I'm learning as much from them as they're learning from me. And I think that in all human interactions, I certainly have had a number of senior people in my life that have guided me, starting with my parents and people like Meg Whitman and Maynard Webb and Mike Jacobson at eBay, on through some folks at Airbnb. But I try to learn from everyone I get in touch with. I think the key to mentorship is not thinking of it entirely as a one-way street, but as a way to mutually exchange information and learn from each other. I learn a ton listening to young entrepreneurs. I love the energy and the fresh perspective that it brings to me. So I love that concept of bringing curiosity every day. That's one of the things that Brian Chesky of Airbnb, founder at Airbnb, has got that I think has made him so successful. Be very easy for him to sit back and say, man, what a big success am I? I've got this $30 billion company that I've built. I must be pretty smart. If you know Brian, Brian is quite different. Brian looks at the position that he's in and says, how can I use my current position to get access to more people who can help teach me? And how can I use this as an opportunity to keep learning? So I kind of try to shift that mentorship notion to this idea of being a lifelong learner and bringing curiosity to what you do every day. And then if somebody is helping you, maybe you can't help them back directly, but you pass it forward. You pass those blessings forward to the next person that you come in contact with.
Well, and speaking of learning, for anybody who hasn't had a chance to read your book yet, let's get tactical for a second. You lay out a process called the 6 C's on how to create a culture of integrity. Can you walk us through that at a high level? And obviously, I hope everybody gets a copy of the book to get into the details.
Sure. Well, the first C deals with the CEO because it all starts at the top. Jeff, I like to say that the CEO is the thermostat for integrity in a company. Not the thermometer. A thermometer takes the temperature in a room. A thermostat sets it. Like it or not, as the CEO, everybody's watching. Everybody is listening to your language. They are watching what you do. And the way that you act sets a tone. It creates the temperature for how the whole company operates. If your leader is committed to acting with integrity, I think all things are possible. If they aren't, it's very challenging to create an environment that has integrity because everyone takes their cue from the temperature set by the CEO. The second thing is you need a code of ethics. Now, if you're just starting out as a small company, you don't need a GE book-like code of ethics. You might only need a couple of paragraphs, but it's important to intentionally talk about some of the issues around integrity that you're going to face, and everybody faces them at all size companies. How do you deal with romantic relationships inside the company? What are you going to do about alcohol? How are you going to deal with conflicts of interest? What are you going to do when a vendor offers you gifts or wants to put you on a customer advisory committee and give you stock? These are all issues that are common in the business world. And there's not necessarily one right answer or wrong approach here. It's important to think about your business, think about your purpose, and figure out what's going to work for you. But you need a code of ethics, I think, in order to guide you. And in doing the code of ethics, it shouldn't be, one person going off and writing it and bringing it back, because we've all got different perspectives when it comes to ethics. You've got one background, I've got another background. We have different life experiences, and we could probably agree that lying, cheating, and stealing is unethical, but a lot of stuff's gray. So getting input from a diverse group within your company can help you build a better code of ethics that gets buy-in from everyone. Another thing is how you communicate. A common way to communicate your code of ethics is to send out that email. Here's the code of ethics attached. Check the box. And I know from anonymous surveys that over half the time, people check the box and never read the code of ethics, a lot like a privacy policy at a website. It doesn't send a very powerful message about its importance. So what we did at Airbnb is we actually had a human conversation about our code of ethics with all employees. I actually taught the code of ethics at every orientation class. We have orientation every week at Airbnb. And I'd go down to the room. Sometimes it might be a dozen people, sometimes it might be 100. And have a conversation with them using specific concrete examples about the code. I learned this from Meg Whitman. Meg Whitman used to come at eBay. She used to come to all the new hire orientation classes. And when I asked her, look, you're the CEO, what are you doing? And she said, there's never a more impactful time than someone's first week at a company. And you can send a powerful message about what you stand for, what you believe in, and how you want them to operate. If you as a leader are there in the room talking about this to them directly. And I've had some very powerful experiences doing this. Jeff, I had a woman recently, or right before the pandemic, I was doing one of these orientation classes. And after the class, she came up to me and she literally had tears coming down her cheek. And I'm thinking, oh no, what did I say? What did I do wrong, right? And she said, Rob, I was working at another big tech company in the Valley. And she told me the name. And she said, my boss was constantly propositioning me for sex. And he wouldn't let go of it, kept pushing. And she said, I had to leave my job, Rob, because I didn't trust that my company was going to do anything about it. She said, you have no idea what it means to come to a new company and to hear a leader live right in front of you talk about this sort of behavior isn't going to happen at Airbnb, and how important it is to have a workplace where we all can do our best. So I think the way that you communicate it is incredibly powerful. Other C's, Jeff, deal with ensuring that there are consequences when the code is broken. Because there can't be a situation where top performers or leaders are exempt, and the only people that are ever disciplined are people you're quote unquote trying to get rid of. And I think you need to have a constant drumbeat of communication around integrity. It's not the sort of thing that you can talk about once at orientation and say, okay, glad we got that out of the way. I was talking to Adam Silver at the NBA. He's a leader that I really admire. And he thinks about this a lot. And he likened it to television advertising. He said, you can't just run a TV ad once and figure that you've gotten your message out. You've got to repeat it. And you can't just have one ad. You've got to have different types of ads because different people hear things different ways. But you've got to keep that constant drumbeat going.
Fantastic. So, Rob, you've got a fascinating career. Love to dive in a little bit now just to learn a little bit more from your experience. You started your career as a federal prosecutor, and you tried spies like Aldrich Ames, and
that's the ultimate,
really interesting questions there.
That's the ultimate workplace ethics violation, right? Selling your country's secrets to foreign governments.
I mean, it must have been a very interesting transition to go from being a federal prosecutor to then go into working at eBay, building out the whole trust and safety division there. So how did you kind of make that transition, and what did you take from, working as a prosecutor into working for a tech company?
Well, being a prosecutor in one sense is a very honorable job, working, representing the government, but it can be a very negative job, Jeff. I mean, you're putting people in jail, often very young people for long periods of time. I wanted to feel like I was doing something more proactive and positive. And I felt that business was a great way to have an impact on the world, frankly, more so than government. I think a lot of us have gotten disillusioned with government's ability to solve big problems in the world. I think business actually provides the best opportunities to do good in the world. And I started looking around when I was a prosecutor at what type of company would want somebody with my background. I talked to a few companies and they said, Rob, you got a great background here. It looks like you're really good at prosecuting people. We don't prosecute people here. But one night I was using a website called eBay. And it struck me that eBay would have problems with illegal items and fraud and regulation. And I thought, hey, why not eBay? They didn't have any job opening, but I just sent them an email to jobs@ebay.com and thought I'd never hear anything again. But there was a phone call waiting for me on my answering machine at home. That dates you as to how long ago this was, right? And I was having dinner with Meg Whitman a couple of weeks later. When I started eBay, there were just 170 people. But what we found is that people from different backgrounds can bring value to companies in different ways. I think eBay learned that while prosecutors bring a perspective about working with government, about rules and how to devise them in ways that will get people's attention, that really brought a lot of value to the business world. It was sort of my first lesson in the power of diversity of all kinds, and how businesses who are open to people from different backgrounds and different experiences can really benefit by bringing those folks in and putting them to work.
Well, and you had a number of really interesting stories in the book around some of the different ethical challenges that you guys faced at eBay, which I think, as a lot of us know, is a platform based on trust. And so I thought that was a really interesting concept. But we'd love to hear a little bit about, some of those early challenges you faced and how you guys kind of thought about creating a framework that could scale.
Yeah, I thought from the beginning that eBay was in the trust business. They don't have any products, they don't have any warehouse. They were in the business, and still are, of helping two total strangers. Neither side of which had a brand really to speak of, get comfortable enough to do business with each other. And one of the ways that we looked at it, Meg looked at me early on and said, "Rob, we want a clean, well-lit marketplace. And people need to feel comfortable." And she said, "I want you to figure out what should the rules be about what you can buy and sell online." And, back then, nobody really knew. One of the first issues I tackled was, can you sell guns on eBay? Can you sell alcohol? What about ticket scalping? It was fascinating because ticket scalping is a great example. Every state has its own laws around ticket scalping. They're all different. And I remember getting a phone call one day from someone in the Florida Attorney General's office. And they were upset because we were selling tickets to a University of Florida football game on eBay at above the face value. And the guy said to me, "Well, that violates the law." So I looked at the listing and I literally said to him, "Can you tell me what law applies if the buyer of the tickets is in Georgia, the seller of the tickets is in Alabama, the game's in Florida, the website servers are in California? Which law applies?" And he laughed and I laughed because nobody knew. But that was the sort of stuff that we had to figure out back in those days. And we created a whole set of infrastructure around these rules to help sort of guide people through the process of buying and selling online. And it was, the Washington Post called me the sheriff of the internet because nobody had really had to think about these things before. But eBay gave me the freedom to help figure out what should the rules be. And if it meant we gave up revenue in the process, so be it. Because it was more important to build a trusted marketplace.
Then you move from eBay to Airbnb, which has its own set of really unique business opportunities, challenges, and in some ways conflicts. You've got eBay, clearly a two-sided marketplace of buyers and sellers. Then you move to a two-sided marketplace of hosts and guests, which I don't know how you get more personal than inviting somebody into your home. So how was that, different or similar challenges?
Well, it's even more of a trust issue, right? If it's one thing to do business with somebody, what about having a total stranger come stay with you? And there were a lot of challenges. And I think one of the earliest challenges we faced was around discrimination. Back in 2016, I'll never forget, it was my first couple of months at the company. We started getting reports of guests of color who were being turned down by hosts based on the color of their skin. And it became a hashtag, Airbnb while Black. And people were chiming in with their stories, and articles were being written, and lawsuits were getting filed. And I remember, being the lawyer, I went off and did my research on, what's our responsibility legally as a platform? We don't condone this sort of behavior. It's against our rules. Are we legally responsible if some hosts act this way? So I went in to meet with Brian and started going through, the legal issues with him. And Brian held up his hand and said, "Stop, I don't care." I said, "What do you mean you don't care?" And he said, "Rob, if this sort of behavior is going on through our platform, then we're failing as a company. Our entire mission is around connecting people. It's all about helping total strangers feel comfortable being in each other's homes. And we are failing as a company if this is happening." He says, "I don't really care what the law is. We're going to fix it. So do what you need to do on the legal side, but we're going to go aggressively try to fix this problem," which was terrific, by the way. And I think we did some things that upset some users. like, making you now can't see someone's picture or name before deciding whether to accept them, all in the interest of preventing discrimination. And I think at one point we implemented a feature and lost a little over 1% of our user base, but we really felt it was the right thing to do, to stand for something. We knew what our purpose was. We knew our North Star. We stood by it. And I think all of us believed that in the long run, we were going to be much better off standing by a principle that we believed in, even if in the short term we took a hit.
Well, and Brian talks about building a 21st century company, building for the long term. I think he's taken a really unique view on that because, based on your last comment, there's a lot of decisions you can make in the short term that are going to cost you users, revenue, profit. And so that, I think, is really where a lot of this comes down to, is how do you make those decisions where in the short term it hurts, but in the long term it helps?
Yeah, Brian doesn't even like the phrase long term. Brian calls it an infinite time horizon. He will not make a decision that he thinks is not in the best interest of the stakeholders. So let's pause on stakeholders for a minute, because I think a lot of ethical issues in the past were caused because we were looking at the whole notion of a company in the wrong way. For so long, Jeff, and you know this, companies had one mantra: shareholder value, right? Whatever is good for shareholder value is good, and we should do it. Now, what that translated into was what's good for the stock price this week, this month, or this quarter. And the optics were terrible, because who benefits when the stock price goes up in a quarter? Well, the executives do, because that's how they're compensated. And in the process, I think of chasing a quarterly number, companies cut a lot of corners ethically. A lot of you didn't worry about pollution and carbon. That wasn't your problem. You didn't worry about how your suppliers were working on the other side of the world. You could fudge on a regulation a little bit, or simply because, well, doing so was good for the shareholder number. I think the world's gotten tired of that. I think the world needs companies to step up and take on, the world's problems. And that may involve long-term thinking. And it actually involves thinking about something other than your profit number. Now, your investors are important. Your stock price is important. Investors are key stakeholders. But why are they the only stakeholders? And I think we've now, just in the last couple of years, seen an outright rejection of that old way of thinking in favor of new thinking, which are the stakeholder principles. Companies need to identify their stakeholders. Airbnb had 5. Our investors were certainly one. Our employees were stakeholders. Our guest, our host, and the community at large, the world at large. So whenever we made a significant decision, we would always ask ourselves, how will this decision affect each of our 5 stakeholders? You can't always make a decision that's good for all 5 stakeholders. Those are easy decisions, right? But they do involve trade-offs. Well, so what you need to do is you need to be measuring the success of each of your stakeholders constantly. And if you see that a stakeholder is faltering, not successful, you need to start adjusting your decision-making to help that stakeholder, because they're all important.
Well, and as you think about that kind of community at large, one of the stakeholders you guys obviously had to deal with at Airbnb and eBay as well is regulators, the government, right? And then somebody worked for the government, you understand the power of it. So how do you weight them as a stakeholder, and how do you kind of think about that as you're working through these issues?
Sure. Well, I think as a citizen, you have a responsibility to follow the law. The problem is when you're an entrepreneur, you're often working in a legal environment that's a little hazy. You're working with laws that were written in many cases before the internet was even born. I'll give you an example. When I was at eBay, my first year, I got a letter from the California Auction Board. They claimed that eBay was an auctioneer, and that we weren't complying with auction laws because we didn't have a sign of a certain size posted out front. And we weren't posting bonds because of bailee responsibilities when you take possession of goods. That was ridiculous because eBay was not an auctioneer by any reasonable definition of the word. So I think as part of being an entrepreneur, you need to look at laws. And when the laws are clear, you've definitely got to obey them. When they're not so clear, I think that's when you've got to work with figuring out how can your business work in this environment. Maybe in many cases, we would reach out directly to regulators and engage them in a conversation. Because I think sometimes the law follows innovation. And if what you're doing is good for the world and you're operating in an uncertain legal environment, maybe there's opportunities to push it forward and be a little aggressive. What you can't do is the sort of thing, and I'll call out Uber here. Uber, not only were they operating in an environment that I think was unclear, but they intentionally hid what they were doing from regulators. I mean, there's one well-known instance where they designed their app to recognize when there was a driver pickup outside the address of the regulator. And in that case, they gave that particular user a different experience. That's the sort of thing that's unacceptable.
So moving from, external parties to internal, employees, as you said, we all have a different perspective of what's right. And one of the things I love that you brought up in the book, which is something we have here at Nasdaq, is an ethics hotline. So we have the ability to engage with our ethics committee, to ask them specific questions. We have anonymous hotlines. And a lot of that comes down to an openness and a willingness for employees to ask the question. So how do you get that part of the culture right, where employees, when they're faced with a question, feel comfortable going in and asking somebody?
Right. I was talking to a company yesterday, and they were telling me, "Oh, Rob, but we don't think we've got any ethical issues. We've got a hotline and we hardly ever get anything." And my response is that may be the first sign of a problem. People are reluctant and traditionally have been quite reluctant to speak up. They don't want to be seen as a whistleblower or rocking the boat. They're afraid it will hurt their career. And so hotlines are something people are worried about going to legal or to HR. It can be an intimidating process. What you want to do is you want to build a culture where people feel comfortable speaking up, where people can raise their hand and say, "Hey, I'm troubled by this. Should we be doing this?" So, one way to do it is, we did something at Airbnb. We called it an ethics advisor program. We questioned, why do legal and HR, why are they the only ones that quote unquote own ethics? So we formed a group. We took people from finance, customer support, engineering. We took them from different offices around the world. And we gave them training on the code of ethics and then put them back in their regular day job and told everyone, if you got an ethics question, you can just go ask the person right there in your office, the person on your team, and they can help you. What we found was people are far more willing to engage with somebody a coworker that they know. In Q1 of this year, for example, we got almost 100 inquiries to ethics advisors. And these are many times relatively small questions about relatively minor issues, things we never would have heard about if we had just relied on a traditional hotline. So, my view is hotline's great. It's important to have, but you have to recognize that a lot of people are intimidated by it. So you got to do things to go out of your way to really send a strong message that raising your hand, asking a question is something that's going to help your career, not hurt your career. I can tell you a story actually around one of these water bottles. We had these water bottles at Airbnb, that Airbnb logo and integrity slogan on there. $30 made by Yeti, very nice, very meta product. And we used to give them out as little rewards when people would ask a tough question or raise an ethical issue that we thought was interesting. One day I was standing, we had these standing desks in these open seating environments, right? I didn't have my own office. I just stood in an open seating area. A guy came over to me and introduced himself. And he said, "Hey, Rob," he was a mid-level manager in IT. He said, Rob, I noticed when you left your desk a little while ago, you didn't lock your computer screen. You left it open. I thought, oh, wow. He was right. And I immediately did what everybody else did in my head. I thought, I got a little defensive. It's like, oh, come on. We're in an Airbnb building with security guard. I was only gone to the restroom for a few minutes. I grabbed an iced tea. Come on. But in the moment, it struck me, what courage did it take for a mid-level manager to walk up to a member of the executive team and call him out on a security violation? That's actually pretty cool. So fortunately, in the moment, I realized that his courage was something we needed to reward. So I thanked him, told him he was absolutely right. He taught me a cool little thing with one button. I could lock my laptop in the future, so I could easily avoid that kind of security violation. And then the next time we were in a large group setting, I stood up at the company and I told the story on myself of what I had done wrong. And I told the story of the guy that called me out on it. And I gave him a water bottle, an Integrity Yeti. We call them Integrity Yetis. And big round of applause for him. He actually wrote me an email a year later. And the email said, Rob, getting that award in front of people was the most powerful moment I had in my career, 6 years at Airbnb. So you can send such a powerful message just by recognizing the small acts of courage like that. And by the way, everybody in the room got the message. It's okay to speak up, to speak truth in the face of power.
Awesome stuff, Rob. And amazing how, a gesture like that can go such a long way. Well, now I'd love to shift it to the Q&A section. So just a reminder to everybody, please go ahead. We've got a few questions teed up here. We may not have time to get to all of them, but we'll do our best to get through them. But please use that Q&A feature down at the bottom of your screen to submit your questions, and we'll get to absolutely as many as we can here before we hit the top of the hour. So Rob, the first question came in around getting buy-in from your, right? It's easy if the CEO buys in, but as you add investors, as you add third parties, how do you get them on board with this type of, program?
Start by being really open about the way that you're going to operate a company. If those of you who haven't seen it, go Google Jeff Bezos's first letter to investors. It's famous because Jeff Bezos said it out really clearly right up front that he was going to operate a company for the long run, that he was not going to take shortcuts for the short term, just in the interest of hitting a number. And when you set out your intentions like that very early on, you attract the kind of investors that you want. Be very careful about who you take money from, right? Make sure that it's not just a check. Make sure that it's actually a relationship of like minds, and that the people that are going to be getting control and ownership over your company believe as you do, that you're not going to just do anything it takes to drive up a valuation for a short term. You're building this for the long term. So I think getting to know the people that you accept money from, that you put on the board, and being very upfront and clear. You're going to see this. Airbnb is filed to go public, and you're going to see this in the filings when they become public. That Airbnb is going to be very clear about their intentions. And I think that sort of clarity and openness up front, and understanding the importance of finding the right kind of partnerships for you will go a long way to saving you headaches in the long run.
We've got another question here around hiring, which is such an important process. You talked about how integrity and having a good focus on this can help attracting talent, but from the employer side, how do you vet for this? How do you interview for this? How do you make sure, people are going to be aligned with your values?
Yeah, you just ask them during the interview, do you have integrity? I wish it were that easy, right? Because everybody thinks they've got integrity. Everybody will raise their hand if you ask that question. I think it's tough. There are a couple of clues that I look for. During interviews, I like to ask somebody to describe a situation where they were faced with an integrity related issue at work, even a small one, and how they handled it. I worry if someone struggles with that question, if they can't think of an example, because I think integrity related questions come up all the time in the workplace. And I worry about the kind of people that have never even really thought about it. I will also say that I see a correlation between people that are very ego driven and integrity challenges. I tend to believe that people who are givers, people who are a little more self-effacing and more humble, are less likely to be driven by ego into an integrity-related challenge. So people that tend to be very focused on all that they've accomplished and how important they are, I think can be a sign of trouble. That said, I will say that I don't view the world as being divided into two neat groups, people who have integrity and people that don't. Science actually doesn't support that. The truth is, in reality, we all struggle with integrity. There's the story that Billy Graham talks about a lot of the Cherokee chief and his son. And the Cherokee chief describes it this way to his son. He said, "There are two wolves fighting inside of me. In fact, there are two wolves fighting inside of all of us. A bad wolf that is very driven by ego and greed and sees the world as a sort of a zero-sum game and always trying to grab as much as it can for itself. And then a good wolf that's driven by doing positive things for others with empathy and being a giver." And the son asked, "Which wolf will win this fight?" And the chief answers, "The one that you feed." So the idea really is that all of us are challenged, but we are more likely to act with integrity when we are in an environment that encourages good action, where we're surrounded by others who have integrity and who talk about integrity as being important, and in an environment that rewards it. If we see leaders around us cutting corners and challenging, saying, get this done no matter what, I don't care, just get the result, then people are more likely to fall into that sort of negative pattern. So rather than being too focused on that interview, I focus more on creating the environment that brings out the good wolf in everyone once they're in the company.
Well, and a lot of companies are dealing with a unique challenge now around onboarding their new employees remotely. It looks like we're all going to be working from home for the foreseeable future. And so we've got a question here about how do you build a culture of integrity in what seems to be our new normal of everybody working from home, and you don't have the water cooler chats, you don't have the management by walking around, you have to schedule a Zoom every time you want to check in on somebody.
Yeah, you got to do it differently. And my instinct is that direct human authentic interaction is the most powerful. And so I do think the new world creates challenges for us. One thing I would do is I would still do orientation talks, and I would still do company-wide meetings and talk about the issues. And I would do them, live. I would not do recordings because I think people tend to tune out videos that they're required to watch. I would get all the newer employees on a Zoom call every week and have a conversation about it. I think that's the next best thing. People need communication. They need to hear from leaders. And if they can't get it face to face, then I think doing it in the new Zoom world is the best that we've got. But we can't let the current circumstances be an excuse for not doing anything at all.
Yeah, I mean, it's been amazing to watch how everybody has adapted and, how much we do. And, as everything continues on, including the stock market, we all seem to be adapting. So I guess, to put on your, look into your crystal ball, another question we got here, but what do you think are going to be the really interesting ethical issues going into the next few years?
Well, I think there are, a ton of them, but one of the most interesting to me is the environment. What is the impact that your business is having on the environment? and what are you doing about it? I think that's an imperative that we've all got to address, because I think it's climate change is an issue that government isn't going to solve for us. I think how we act individually and through companies, I think will be the difference in how successful we are in fighting it. And look, I think there are a ton. By the way, I see somebody ask an anonymous question up front. They ask a tough question, and in the spirit of integrity, I don't want to duck it. Somebody's asking how Airbnb reconciles what they did and do to destroy affordable housing in cities around the world, and how their business model continues to do so. So I should address that. The first is that there is not a lot of data on the issue. I think the Airbnb has a number of competitors, the hotels in particular, who try to drive that narrative. I think they would love for people to believe that Airbnb is somehow responsible for destroying affordable housing. The facts just don't back that up. What I will say is that in cities where Airbnb has seen that there is a housing price increases, Airbnb is actually sitting down with regulators and working through and agreeing to regulatory schemes that will help address the issues. But I mean, look at San Francisco and New York. Those are two cities that were, before the pandemic, had significant housing challenges and major cost of living challenges. Those are two cities that Airbnb was virtually regulated out of. But regulating Airbnb out of those two cities didn't do anything to affect the cost of housing. So I wouldn't be quick to blame Airbnb for that particular issue. I think housing is an emotional issue that we all want to believe that there's a simple answer to, and I don't think that's true. But I will also tell you that Airbnb recognizes that it does have an obligation to communities. I think a number of companies would shrug their shoulders and say, well, we're obeying the law. That's not our problem. And Airbnb is working in partnership with cities, even agreeing to regulate itself significantly out of cities, or moving Airbnbs out of city centers to deal with this issue. I know that Airbnb, success for Airbnb would not be Airbnb's making a lot of money in cities and communities are being hurt. That's not the way that Airbnb wants to operate. They're committed, I think, to being good partners to communities, and they're working in partnership in those places where there might be some impact.
And there's another interesting one here towards the bottom of the Q&A. Are business schools doing enough to teach ethics? And I think that's a really interesting question, especially as education is also going through a dramatic change and shift, and might be easier to teach remotely, maybe harder.
Yeah. And is the question more around the ethics of remote learning and what colleges are doing in response?
Oh no, just in general, are business schools doing enough around integrity and ethics?
Well, I have seen an evolution, but again, very, very recently, to injecting more around ethics and integrity into the curriculum at schools. But you got to remember, like Jeff, up until 2 years ago, shareholder value was the mantra that was broadly accepted throughout the business world. So what we've got now is we've got a generation of leaders that's the way they were taught. That's the right way to do things. So I think it's going to take a little while, hopefully not long, but leaders have got to make adjustments, big adjustments from what they were taught to operating in this new world. And really, I think we all have to even understand what this new stakeholder world means in reality. But I do believe that this business schools, one thing about professors in business schools, they're reluctant to change their curriculum, right? Because it's effort, but they're going to have to. They're going to have to learn that the old way, the world is moving very quickly. Teaching about how 20th century companies operated isn't going to work, because it's a new century and the world is definitely different.
Well, and I think that, going back to a topic I raised earlier around the disclosures around ESG, environmental social governance, it's the Wild West right now. You've got like 40 different frameworks rating companies. The SEC has not weighed in and mandated any disclosure around things like carbon footprint, gender diversity, making sure the pay ratios are on other than CEO to average employee.
Yeah.
So, I'm curious, as you have a very uncertain outlook there, how do you get people to kind of buy into, what they should be doing, knowing that there could be some downside if you're, say, disclosing your, gender diversity and it's not getting better, for example?
First of all, I think we're really good at the financial disclosures now, right? We've had decades to settle on the sort of numbers that we report on and how we report on things. I think it's going to take a little while for us to sort through the right way to disclose things around environmental, social, and governance issues as well. But it's coming and it's inevitable. I would say that transparency is the great deodorant. You can't be afraid, I think, to disclose this sort of information because, like it or not, it's going to come out anyway. An employee is going to leak it, or the government's going to force you to get it out. And I think it can have a powerful forcing function, frankly. If you get it out there, I think that will put more pressure on you to make progress. And so I'm a believer in, even though it might not be pretty, acknowledge that you've got an issue, commit to do better, and then the whole world can help you hold yourself accountable to making progress.
Sunshine is sometimes the best disinfectant. And I think that's a great one to end on. Nicola, do you want to say a couple words before we wrap up here?
I would be delighted to. First and foremost, Rob and Jeff, thank you so much for the insights and the inspiration today. I will always be looking now as to how to encourage the good wolf to come out whenever in doubt, and most definitely leaning into realizing this is a marathon, not a sprint, just like with entrepreneurship. To continue to persist in good ethics and integrity requires constant communication and constant feeding of that machine. Thanks for encouraging us to do just that, Rob and Jeff, today. Again, thank you for all of you who are joining. I do have a favor to ask of all of you. Again, we get smarter by making sure the content and the outcomes that you've learned today are relevant and meaningful and helpful in your journey as entrepreneurs changing the world for the better for us. So if you can take just a moment to complete that feedback link that you'll see in the chat window, we would deeply appreciate it. This video will be available afterwards, and we'll make sure that we send and share the link out with you. And again, we do have some upcoming programs for those of you who reflected challenges in the marketing domain. Hold tight. We've got a PR program coming up shortly on September 10th, and one before that on September 8th around Instagram marketing. So we'll be sure to highlight those opportunities for you in post-event feedback today. Again, Rob, Jeff, to our sponsors, thank you all so much. Entrepreneurs, keep being an amazing, integral bunch. We're inspired by all that you're doing and looking forward to seeing you change the world. Thank you.
And Nicola, one quick hint about who our next author will be.
Jeff is so right. We are incredibly fortunate to have another amazing, inspiring leader coming up. So stay tuned for that. That is happening in just about a month's time, right, Jeff? Just about a month. So again, everybody, thank you so much. More to follow soon.
And can I interject one thing, Nicola? There were a number of questions that I didn't get to answer. Anybody that wants to reach out and connect with me on LinkedIn, please feel free to do it and throw me your questions and I'll be happy to answer them.
Jeff, thank you so much. We so appreciate that. All right, guys, take care. Talk soon. Bye-bye.